Buonasera a tutti. Bonsoir, buenas noches, bonne nuit. And I think if I get it right, it's guten Abend. Anyway, the reason for all those languages is to say welcome wherever you are joining us on the planet. A very good evening, good afternoon, or good morning, depending on your time zone. Today, I'm really quite pleased because apart from being an AMI board member, our guest is also the Vice President of the International Assembly of the Society of American Magicians. He actually helped me set up the Facebook page. He's in the magic world known as the academic magician. For his day job, he is a professor of political science at Nottingham University, which, as some of you will know, is quite a prestigious university. He also has been invited to several places on the planet, including, if I've got it right, the United Nations, Chatham House, and such prestigious places to talk on a variety of various topics. He has been on the Darkstone dossiers before, and that was wonderful. And as we had book talkers, I thought, well, it's got to be kind of interesting to have an author of not just magic books, but other books, and a writer of many articles, to come and chat with us about the books he likes, the books he favors, maybe the books he wrote. And let's just generally sit around the round table and do exactly that. Book talkers. Why book talkers? Well, some of you may know that back in the day, I was on the Diné, aka Navajo Reservation in Window Rock, Arizona, and they have a really beautiful statue commemorative thing there for all the Diné Navajo people who worked in the Marine Corps in World War II. And some of you may have seen the movie known Windtalkers with Nicolas Cage and Adam Beach. And they transmitted messages which the Japanese could not decipher. They would do it in Diné, in Navajo. So they were known as the Code Talkers. So I thought, wow, it'd be cool to have book talkers. And then Todd decided, and I like his title better, Bibliophilia, which is kind of nice. So I think we've come to the point now where it would be prudent for me to do nothing more than just say, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the academic magician, Todd Landman.
Thank you very much, Anthony. I appreciate being on this segment. And when you pitched the idea of book talkers to me, I was immediately interested. And then I thought, well, what would I bring to the magical world by book talking? And that's where I came up with this idea of bibliofusion. And for that, really, it means how do we fuse the ideas from very popular books, and in my field, the academic, sort of philosophical, historical, political, scientific world with that of the magical world. And I think that bibliofusion's been sitting behind quite a lot of the performance pieces I've developed over the years. And what I was going to do this evening is talk a little bit about, the world of books. As you see behind me, it's a small selection of. So I was just saying this idea of bibliofusion really is bringing two worlds together. So part of my world is reading lots of books. And typically, when you write an academic text, you may have 500 citations, and so you have to read everything and then create your own arguments. I collect my own data, analyze my own data, and construct arguments from that process. But the background reading is huge, and that's true of everything that we do. And that comes from a lifelong love of books. And I think that my training in magic has always been grounded in books. I don't learn from videos. I mean, occasionally I do. I'm not too keen when a product arrives and it has a video link I have to go to. I'd much rather read a manual or a PDF or something that talks me through the steps. And yeah, I've got friends, when they read magic manuals, they don't like them. They find them too authoritative. They find the language antiquated. They don't like it. But that's how I've learned. So on this side of me is pretty much all the magic books. And then around the house is a whole mix of things that interest me. And when I think about how I got interested in connecting magic and books, I think it started at a really young age without me even realizing it. And I wanted to share one of the first books that had the biggest impression on me. and that is a collection of all the Sherlock Holmes stories from Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. And the thing that excited me the most about this really is in the study of Scarlet, where he introduces the idea of the science of deduction. Technically, in philosophical terms, it's abduction, but I'm not going to split hairs on a Saturday afternoon about that term. But what we learn in the study of Scarlet is the introduction of science of deduction. And one of my favorite illustrations of the science of deduction comes in The Man with the Yellow Mask, where someone has just left Holmes's flat, and he comes home and Watson is there, and he said, oh, we found a pipe on the mantelpiece, and Holmes picks it up, looks at the pipe. He says, yes, he's about 6'3". He's left-handed. He's of considerable financial means, all this sort of stuff. And Watson says, how on earth do you know that? And he goes, well, I can see from the pipe that he's strong. He's bitten into the stem of the pipe and cracked it, but he obviously values his possessions because he's filled the cracks with silver. If I smell the tobacco, it's a particularly high grade of tobacco, therefore he has the money to afford it. He said, what about the 6'3", and left-handedness? And he said, oh, well, there's a burn on the side of the pipe, which means he lights the pipe on the gas lamp, which means he's tall enough to reach the gas lamp. And the burn is on the side of the pipe, suggests he's left-handed. Now, the great thing about all of that is that you have a disparate set of observations, you pull them together, and you make a deduction as to who the owner of that object is. And this repeats itself through all the stories. But I was so enamored with the science of deduction that when I went to apply to university way back in the 1980s, I actually wrote an essay about this and how the science of deduction is really important because I wanted to become a lawyer. And I had to write this essay, to get in the door. I then went for an interview, and the person who interviewed me asked me about this essay. So that book enchanted me completely. The next one that I think sits in parallel is a Walter B. Gibson book on close-up magic. And it's a wonderful collection, it's beyond close-up, actually, because there's quite a few bits of stage magic and everything else in this. But I've had this since I was about 8 years old. The complete illustrated book of close-up magic, professional techniques fully revealed by a master magician. Now, when I was growing up, the only place you could find things like this was sort of Walden Books down at the mall, right? I didn't know anything about anything. I didn't know about lieutenants. I didn't know about magic suppliers. I didn't know anything. All I knew is I wanted to learn everything that was in here. And they're sort of black and white photographs. I learned my billiard ball routine from this book. I learned coin routines. And I remember getting to the mentalism section and going, and I skipped over it because it seemed to be lots of charts and things you had to memorize, And then, of course, when I discovered mentalism, I went back to those sections and I learned there's some really just corkers in that book. So those two books, on the one hand, Sherlock Holmes, on the other hand, Walter B. Gibson, are in some ways metaphors for what I want to share with you this evening, and where I find ideas in the books I read, and I something sparks my imagination, and then I think, okay, in what way can that be a magical effect? In what way can that be a routine? I think about the routine, the effect, the impact on the audience, and then I think about, okay, what sorts of methods could I combine to get to that effect and have the most impact on my audience? All the while, I feel quite strongly committed to the idea of baffling people, educating people, and entertaining them all at the same time. And it's not a I fool you approach, but a come with me into this little chamber I've created and share some ideas with me from books, from philosophy, from history, from humanity. But I'm going to illustrate the importance of those ideas through the medium of magic. So
at this point, which is a good point, perched on behind you, is this.
That's right.
Which is the book we've put together at AMI, which I mentioned earlier. You're a board member and have helped enormously on many things. And you're one of the contributors here. And this is precisely part of what your contribution says. All of those things you just mentioned and bringing people in to be involved. If you don't have your copy yet, I know everybody here's kind of ordered one. Wait till you get it. I was part of putting this all together, and I was really excited when it turned up, I can tell you. So if you haven't got it yet, go get it.
So,
sorry, go ahead.
For the magical meditations, it was an opportunity to reflect. I my chapter in the book talks about the use of boundary objects. And if anyone didn't know what a boundary object is, I can talk about that. But I wanted to get back to this idea, the sort of the Sherlock Holmes and the Gibson. I got into the University of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia to study my undergraduate degree in political science. And I remember doing a module on philosophy. And one of the books that was introduced was Descartes, René Descartes' Discourse on Method. And, you know, when I'm a young, I don't know, 18-year-old, I found it impenetrable, and I wasn't quite sure why I was there. And I remember the lecture that the professor gave about the ball of wax. And the ball of wax is about Descartes looking at a ball of wax and thinking, is this a liquid or is this a solid? Right? And he's rolling it in his fingers in his sort of armchair. And then he says, well, actually, I don't know if it's a liquid or a solid. And he said, I think that there are certain things I see in the world that I'm not quite certain that I have seen them or that my senses are deceiving me. And he said, if I look out the window, I see a tree and it's this big. But if I walk up to the tree, it's taller than me. Therefore, how can I trust my sense of sight, right? And that led to the next step in his philosophy, which was, what if I actually doubted everything that I see in the world, everything that I observe, hear, feel? What's the one true thing that I could say? And that process that he goes through is called hyperbolic doubt. And so that extreme form of doubt leads to his famous phrase, cogito ergo sum, which is, I think, therefore I am. Now, it sounds like a really simple phrase, and we hear it all the time, but it actually establishes the idea that our mere existence comes from our ability to think, but it also suggests that there's a separation between the mind and the body, mind-body dualism. Now, none of this registered with me when I was a student, really. I came back to this book many, many years ago, and I thought, actually, there's a great premise for a magical effect here. So I cobbled together a self-published book, which I call a collection of the world's greatest philosophers. And with the help of the wonderful mentalist magician from Leicester named Phil Smith, who produces all this incredible stuff, he created a series of graphical images for me of different philosophers. I don't know if you can see that, but that's Karl Marx himself, right? And these are like black and white pen and ink drawings. And I cobbled together a whole collection of these different philosophers, one on each page, the name of the philosopher, the dates they lived, and some of their main ideas listed here. And the wonderful magician Daniel Young in London gave me permission to use this idea. He had been working on something in mentalism where he had a little A6 notebook that he created into a Svengali notebook. And this was back in 2006, 2007, I think, or maybe a little bit later. And he said, sure, you can use that method. It's fine. He had a thing where he would have someone flip through his notes and he would get Paris, and he had a Eiffel Tower in a bag on the table. And someone would say, I've come to your Paris entry. And then he would reveal this Eiffel Tower on the table, which was quite nice. And the original incarnation of this, I had a playing card reveal, and that seemed really to cheapen the effect. So I've changed it completely. But Phil produced an image per philosopher, and I made a handmade Svengali book. So I hand trim the pages, and this predates some of the Sven pad approaches you see out on the major market. But the book's great because it's pocket sized, fits in my blazer, and I can walk into a corporate event, I can walk into an academic event or a public event and ask people, and I can actually show them the pages and actually recite some of the big ideas of all the different philosophers, Wittgenstein, et cetera, et cetera. But then they lay it flat on their hand. They then turn to a page, and of course they get to René Descartes. And so the revelation is me sort of recounting the ball of wax story, getting to hyperbolic doubt, which is one of the hit words on the page, and then getting to the final conclusion of cogito ergo sum, and then I name the philosopher. And it's fun because this idea of the separation between mind and body, but the connection between two minds is kind of fun, a little bit of a play on that idea. And there's a wonderful video on my YouTube channel where we recorded this with a bunch of students, and they really, really enjoyed it. We did it at University of Nottingham's Lakeside Arts Theatre with about 50 students, and they really, really enjoyed it. There is a dual reality element to this effect as well. I actually have one of Descartes' drawings in the bottom, which is a drawing of a pendulum, because he was really interested in studying the science of pendulums. So that's a a drawing from one of his books on that had his analysis of pendulums. So another way of doing this is to come out with a small bag with a pendulum in it, introduce the topic, do all this other stuff. Everybody sees every page with no image on it. And when we get to Descartes, of course, the dual reality is the person who sees Descartes also sees the pendulum. And so we can shut the book and everyone thinks everything's finished. They say, oh, by the way, was there something else associated with Descartes that you saw? And the person says, yes. And you say, and what was it? And they say, well, it looked like a pendulum. And then, of course, I can open the bag and take out the pendulum, which gives me a natural segue into a pendulum-based routine that I do. In fact, on one of my videos, I actually connect it to some more ideas about Descartes, because apparently he was a Rosicrucian. And there's a whole book about Descartes being a Rosicrucian. So I do a kind of witch hand thing with a copper ball and a black ball. And, whether they align with, the sort of universe or don't align with the universe, etc. So again, it's sort of a witch hand routine, but it is built into this more philosophical vein that is introduced by Descartes. So just by introducing that idea, I think it captures this notion of bibliofusion I'm trying to talk about. And in addition to the Descartes thing, I have a number of things to share with you. So I have some things to share with you across a range of philosophers, as well as a novelist and even an ex-president. So hopefully you'll see how this concept really does travel. And it's infinite, because there's so many books and there's so many things we can do in magic. This is just my own take on how I do these things. So years ago, I was sitting in my house reading Roger Penrose's The Road to Reality. Now, this is a hefty tome, and his subtitle is A Complete Guide to the Laws of the Universe. And I thought, well, I have to have that. So I started reading this thing, and in the early pages of this book, I got captured by unbelievable statement where he talks about Plato, and he talks about three things, that Plato said the universe was comprised of. Plato said there was a mental world, physical world, and a mathematical world. He actually thought that the mathematical world was separate from the physical world and the mental world, and that the mathematical world in many ways is out there to be discovered. And this really aligned well with another book I read, which is Fermat's Last Theorem, which is about the Pythagorean theorem, which is, the square of a hypotenuse is equal to the square of the two opposing sides. Well, Fermat said, yes, but it doesn't work for any number larger than a square. He goes, I have a proof for this, but I don't have enough room in the margin of this page. And it sat for 350 years before a mathematician from Cambridge University solved this conundrum. I love this. 350 years after someone writes a marginal note, an amazing professor of mathematics proves that Fermat was correct. And there have been two popular books on Fermat's Last Theorem. Is it a mental construct? Is it something to be discovered? This thing where we say a statue is just waiting to be discovered inside a large piece of marble, right? Well, a mathematical proof or an equation is just waiting to be discovered in the mathematical world, as opposed to the mental world or the physical world. And so Penrose got me really into Plato, and he references Plato's famous treatise, the Timaeus, which is Plato's sort of theory of the universe and how it all comes together and how it works. And of course, in this book, he actually not only talks about this mathematical world and the structure of mathematics and the discovery of different worlds, but he also, of course, develops the idea of the Platonic solids in that book. And I got really captivated with Platonic solids. And I brought a little set with me. These are quite typical now. If any of you have ever played Dungeons and Dragons as a child, or go to any of the gaming conventions, etc. These are, I'm going to just, hopefully you can see those. They're quite small and quite pretty. They're all brass and quite lovely. But what Plato said is they all have sides that are of equal size. They have vertices, angles, etc., that define them, and each one's unique from the other, and each one's a perfect geometrical shape. So far, so good. But then he takes the next step, and he says, well, actually, the tetrahedron, or the four-sided figure, is actually a symbol for fire, right? One of the elements. And he goes on to say that the cube, or the hexahedron, is a symbol or a representation of Earth. The 8-sided figure, the octahedron, is a symbol for air, and the icosahedron, the 20-sided die, is a symbol for water. So the 4 main elements of fire, earth, air, and water are captured by these Platonic solids. The last one is called the dodecahedron, which Plato suggests might relate to the whole of the universe. And Aristotle said it might relate to ether, but that debate has never really been resolved. But for magicians, my God, do we have a powerful thing here, right? So we have fire, earth, air, water, and spirit. The other thing that's great is that each of these, of course, this is a 1 to 4, this is a 1 to 6, this is a 1 to 8, this is a 1 to 20, and this is a 1 to 12. If you roll those randomly, not only do you get a spillage and a kind of location of these different elements on a table, you also get a mathematical weighting. So if I roll a 4 on the tetrahedron, I know fire is really strong, right? If I roll a 2 for earth, that's weaker than fire, right? And if I roll a 7 for air, then I can talk about the presence of air. And you can look at the distance between them. So it's a completely flexible improvisational tool, if you will, that works for personal readings and a more intimate performance if you're into bizarre magic, etc. So that's Plato and the Platonic solids. Now, I thought at that point, I'm going to leave Plato alone. I've had enough. I've had enough Platonic mentalism for one day. But then I read the Republic, because as a political scientist, we all have to read the Republic. And of course, in the Republic, Plato sets forth his ideas about what the ideal society should look like. Ironically, he puts the philosophers in charge, which I think is hilarious. The guardians of the state, he refers to them, right, in the structure of government. Now, what's great about Plato's Republic is you think it's a book about political theory, but in some of the early pages, in the early passages, there's an amazing thought experiment in here called the Ring of Gyges. And in the Ring of Gyges, he tells a story of a Bedouin wanderer who falls into or walks into a crevice that was created by an earthquake. And in that crevice, he finds a bronze horse, and the stomach of the bronze horse is split open. And in that stomach of the bronze horse, he finds a small ring. And the Bedouin puts the ring in his pocket and leaves the crevasse and, goes about his ways. But he learns later that every time he wears the ring, he vanishes from sight. He becomes invisible. Which I think has a lot to do with Tolkien's use of the invisible ring in The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings. His influence could have been rather Platonic, right? But again, this set up a great premise for a magical effect. Now, what you're actually looking at is a very expensive book and a very expensive box. And I'm not at liberty to tell you the method here, but I have performed this at the Magic Circle, and I didn't even tell them how it worked because I just love the method, but I also love the effect. The book itself is about $600 to produce. However, in the locked box, I keep one of the rings, or the ring, and it's tremendous byplay that you can have with your audience with this ring, because you can hold it up and say, this is the ring, and it's so precious that I have to keep it in a locked box, okay? And I say, I'm not going to put it on right now because I want you to continue to be able to see me, which is just a fun bit of patter, as it were. But ultimately what I can do, and there's a video of this as well with the students at University of Nottingham on YouTube, where the ring is in the box and I leave the box open. I turn my back. I ask them either to take the ring or not take the ring. And this is premised on Plato's argument that if you were able to be invisible, would you be tempted to commit what he calls unjust acts, i.e. theft, adultery, robbing the pharaoh, whatever, right? Or not. And so my participants are given the choice to either take the ring or leave the ring in the box. And then they've made their choice. They shut the box so that I can hear that they've made their choice. That way, my back can stay turned the whole time. I know immediately whether they've taken the ring or not. And one could just do it as a sort of, it's almost like a witch hand, or is it in the box or not in the box type routine. However, with some clever use of language, I'm also able to have multiple iterations of whether they take the ring or not take the ring, which can be linked to a prediction. And in my case, I have a prediction on the structure of government. So I ask them if they want a divine king or they want an elected premier. I ask them if they want a sort of rubber stamp a group of elders or they want a real parliament. And finally, I ask if they want a kangaroo court, if they want real justice. And whatever they say, they pick the premier, a senate, and a system of justice, right? Because I use my language to be able to sort of manipulate. I know what they've already chosen. So I say, if you've taken the ring, you believe in a premier. Oh, you've obviously taken the ring. You believe it should be a premier. If they hadn't taken the ring, I said, if you haven't taken the ring, you believe in a premier. Right? So because I know in advance whether they've taken the ring or not, I can just change the sentence around and get to the outcome that I require. So it's a wonderful thing. We call it the Ring of Gyges. And then more recently, I continued to read Plato. And in the book, the 10th book of the Republic, there's a really bizarre finish to the Republic. It starts to go into the spiritual realm. And in that, there's another thought, not a thought experiment, but a story he calls the myth of R. And the myth of R, spelled E-R, it looks like but it's pronounced R, is about a soldier who dies and becomes resurrected. And after his resurrection, he confronts 4 portals, 2 portals above him, 2 portals below. In one of the portals above, people are going up into heaven. In the other portal, they're coming back down. And below him, people are going into earth. And in the other one, they're coming out. And he recounts the story of this guy going into the earth and seeing the depths of hell, effectively, and coming back out. And then, of course, going into heaven. And the thing that connects the two is this thing called the spindle of necessity, which is 7 concentric circles of silver with a siren sitting on each one. And they decide whether you go to heaven or hell, right? So it's this really elaborate theory. However, what I'm thinking is, Plato believed in the immortal soul. And therefore, even if you die, your soul still lives and you will be judged for the things that you've done before your death. So this is great premise, using the same method, but with different objects. So I have another box. And in this one, I have a skull representing death and a heart representing life. It's a little bit gruesome because it's not like a pretty heart you see on a Valentine card, but it's an actual heart. Again, without telling you the method, I can have both objects in the box, turn my back, and I can say to a participant, if you feel like you've led a virtuous life and you fear not death, then choose the skull. If you feel like you've not led a virtuous life and that you need more time on earth to become virtuous, then please choose the heart. And after you've made your choice, shut the box. So it's like the ring, but it's with 2 objects now. And same method, but different book from Plato, different concept around virtue rather than whether you'd be tempted to commit injustice. But I think that it is an example or an illustration of how wonderful ideas from a much read book over thousands of years can be brought into the modern period, the contemporary period, into an entertaining magical performance.
Well, good evening. Now, this is really interesting because I've just jumped on board and you've just mentioned some of the philosophers there. Never actually occurred to me because I've just finished a 12-week philosophy course.
Mm-hmm.
And it's been really fascinating. It involved probably 2 or 3 key things that have suddenly become very, very important to me in my life. And I'm only mentioning this because from an entertainment point of view, it never even occurred to me to dovetail this in with it. So listen to this is fantastic. 2 of the 3 key things that I've learned, just as an aside, is one is pausing. Very important to pause in one's life rather than going head over heels and headstrong into things. The second thing is another very important thing that we learned was, what would a wise man say? And it's a fantastic saying because that's what I say to myself. And also another key thing that came up is about thinking about other people. So when, for example, we were talking about when somebody winds us up or gets on our nerves, particularly when we're driving along, we kind of tend to get really, really upset with people and kind of go, oh, come on, hurry up. But, we don't know whether that person in front is the nurse, the doctor, the mother, the daughter, the lawyer, the someone that's there to help someone else. And that has completely changed my mindset on things, completely. And not only that, but here's the other interesting thing about this, and this is why, and Anthony always says to me, there's no such thing as serendipity. And, you know, he's always telling me the universe put this message here at this moment, at this time. And it's just all kind of like falling into place. And I've been looking for an edge, you know, something to turn my entertainment round. I'm curious, as my question, which has taken a long time to get round to it, what got you into this to start using philosophy as a key to entertainment?
So thank you for your question, Paul. So Paul, I was you know, in the beginning, I was talking about reading Sherlock Holmes as a young kid and being fascinated with all the stories. It was always accepted within my family that we would all go to university. You know, not going to university was just not an option, right? And so I really just loved being a student, and I never stopped. In fact, I was going to be a lawyer. I was going to speak Spanish and practice law and help the Spanish-speaking community in the United States where I grew up. And in the middle of my university time, I ended up discovering political science, and then I thought, no, actually, I want to become a professor, right? So that was like the vision. And I did all that. And alongside all that, I was doing a lot of magic shows, partly to help fund my studies. And there was a lot of opportunity at university with student events, faculty events, all kinds of things that you could get involved in. But like you, I felt like my magic was fine. I could do mind reading. I could do coins across. I could do billiard balls. I could do anything, you know, absolutely. Linking rings, professor's nightmare, you name it, I could do it. But what was the point? So I asked myself the question, I'm not just a performing monkey. I want to think about why I'm doing what I'm doing. And is there a way to use magic to communicate bigger questions, bigger ideas? And it wasn't until I discovered mentalism really, I was explaining earlier, I used to pass over the mentalism section of a book because it seemed to be all sorts of tables and charts and things you had to memorize. And then I discovered, of course, 13 Steps to Mentalism, and that changed my life forever. Simply because sitting and reading that and thinking about just how a small piece of information can allow you to deliver such a powerful and many times emotional performance for people, just on a very small piece of information, whether it's where someone traveled on holiday, where they want to travel on holiday, who they kiss for the first time and where, you know, whatever it is. And if you're good at what you do in terms of drip feeding information, and, you know, the reveal shouldn't just be, I mean, Burling Hull has a great essay on this. Don't just blurt out you kissed your first person on the beach in 1972. You know, you say, well, it feels like the early 1970s. I smell this salt air and I see birds and you're eating chips, you know, that kind of stuff. And so for me, it was about how do we get meaningful magic? How do we link not just the emotional impact with the participant, but link it to a larger set of ideas? And I thought, well, why don't I think about bringing the academic world together with the magical world? And I kid you not, I went to a marketing company that does branding and websites and all this stuff. And they interviewed me for 2 hours. And they said, all right, go away. We'll call you back in 2 weeks and we'll have a solution for you. So I came back in 2 weeks and they said, right, you are the academic magician, because the way you spoke to us, those two worlds can come together for you. And we're going to do a brand that has a big ampersand in between academic magician. So some people will look at your website and say it's the academic and magician, and others will see it as the academic magician. And the artistic sort of designer in the firm came to me and he goes, you know, I was in Camden Market over the weekend and I found these block prints from the Victorian period. And I picked up two that are your initials, T and L. And they made that into my logo for me, put it on my business cards. It's a motif for the website. And they helped me almost see the light, if you will, about what it would mean to be the academic magician. So that, it's a very long-winded answer to your question, but it's not something I just thought of overnight. I was living parallel lives as an academic, a student, master's student, PhD student, professor, blah, 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 and as well a gigging magician going out and doing shows, you know, anywhere I could. And yet I needed that deeper meaning in my performances. So I crafted the academic magician and brought the two worlds together. And for me, this is a very kind of fertile combination of things for me to use. And hopefully what I have to share in this discussion, inspires folks to think as well on how you might put that together. I have to say it's not easy. You're not going to go table hopping with philosophy. But you can let things slip in now and again. And my favorite sort of performance is to do a stage show where I have a paid audience, 250 people, great sound system, superb images behind me, really great furniture and props on the stage, the Oriental carpet or the Turkish carpet, and with decanters of wine and bookshelves and all that kind of stuff that it almost looks like what you see behind me. And then the last observation I make is that because I've read lots of stuff, I can talk like forever, as you're hearing, and that becomes verbal misdirection. It's a wall of information that gives me cover to do all kinds of stuff, that you're very familiar with as a magician. And I think, a lot of the times the methods allow me the trick's over within a minute. I already know the information, or I already made the switch, or I've already done what I need to do. But that gives me the luxury of living in that philosophical world and leading the witness into this, it's not a trap, but a sort of outcome that they thought couldn't possibly, couldn't be possible. And it takes a while, I think, to hone the skill and to pull all that together. And it takes a while to make that appealing to a broader audience, because a lot of people criticize me as being too verbose, too slow, and who would enjoy that kind of magic. And I think on balance, I proved them wrong, but I also have some really nice clients, from large corporates down to private estate parties. Did one in London Wednesday night. It was a private engagement. It was fantastic. And it was a walk around mix and mingle type thing. And I knew that the people in the audience were academics, so I could push the envelope on the academic stuff. While at the same time, what's really interesting is super well-educated, well-trained people find magic more baffling than others. Because they're so bloody rational, and they just get confounded by some of the things we do. I've had, senior professors of British politics shout at me, and there's no way you could be able to do that, right? And I don't know, it was a, find the lady 3 Monty style effect, I don't know what it is. I've been reading articles about super intelligent people find magic really baffling. So if I may, I wanted to move on to something kind of fun. Another major tome is Wittgenstein's Philosophical Investigations. This is not an easy read, okay? It's dense, and it introduces the idea of language games. But again, within this book is a thought experiment, and it's called the Beetle Experiment. And the Beetle Experiment is very simple. He says to the reader, imagine an island where on that island, everybody was given a small box, okay? And in that box, they were told there was a beetle. And the one condition of them keeping the box and looking after the beetle is that they couldn't look in anyone else's box. So imagine this island of people. They all have a box with a beetle in it. And every day they look inside and they see their beetle and they look after their beetle, but never do they ever share what's in their box with anyone else. Now, the interesting thing is that, for example, in this box, I actually do have a beetle. It's an emerald beetle sealed in acrylic. So there's a beetle. And it's the only thing that's in my box. There's nothing else in it, just my beetle. And I've not shown it to anyone in the box. But imagine if there was someone else on that island that reached in and they too have a beetle. But theirs is a VW beetle. And like everyone else on the island, it's only the one beetle that they have. There's nothing else inside their box. And another person might reach in and they too have a beetle. It happens to be a little card with the word beetle written into it. And like everyone else, their box only has one beetle in it and nothing else. And finally, the last person may also have a beetle in their box, and that beetle is John Lennon. Now, whether it's popular culture or straight language, advanced manufacturing like the VW or the natural world, the lesson for Wittgenstein is that language can never be private. Language is public and shared. And for us to understand the meaning of words, we need to be and interact with other people. But then again, those things that are private might mean that our own beetle simply ceases to exist. This is Colin Rose's Baffle Box. I've seen this performed all over the place at Blackpool and other places. It's basically for production of coins. It's beautifully made. It works like a dream. It's absolutely fantastic. And when I read the beetle experiment in Wittgenstein, I thought, okay, there are two ways to do this. I originally used to perform it with 4 boxes, like a Kuretsuki routine. So there were 4 boxes on stage, each with a different beetle, and each person had a box. And I would say, on the count of 3, everybody look in your box, but don't look in the box of the person next to you. And they would all look in. And I said, can you each confirm that you have a beetle? And they would kind of smirk because they would see these different objects. And yes, they had a beetle in their box, right? So there was this nice little disconnect with the audience. And then I would do a kind of, I would know what kind of beetle each person had in their box. Because I marked the boxes, right? Simple method, but it was kind of fun, but it was cumbersome to carry around. And I've kind of moved on to this one because I just think it's so elegant. You can show the first beetle and it makes everyone comfortable because that's what they expect. The VW gets a laugh. The John Lennon is kind of a pun. And then everything comes back in and it disappears. So, but at the same time, they learn about the importance of language, the privacy or the shared nature of language, and the importance of human communication all in the same shebang. So hopefully you found that interesting.
Very, very much so. I've actually seen you perform that, and it's fascinating.
There's a video on YouTube, as ever.
Yeah. Well, no, you put it on one of the shows I think we produced a while back, and that was really good. Oh, when you were on the Darkstone dossiers, I think you may have shared that with us. I don't recall, but I do know you did share it. It's interesting you brought up Ludwig Wittgenstein, a very good friend of ours who's also part of the Magiculum, who is also a certified member of AMI and also a professor at university. I think you know where I'm going with this. Marcus Field. Yeah,
Marcus Field's great. Yeah.
He's wonderful.
a shameless plug. This is the Magiculum 2, which was the edited volume that I put together back in 2020 in the depths of COVID. But Marcus has a really lovely chapter in that, and he talks about his contract with the audience. So he knows that if he's appearing and performing in front of a bunch of electrical engineers, I think he's an electrical engineer, he knows he can't say, I'm the wonderful Mephisto mystic from the far beyond, and I'm going to read your mind. He does something that's more appropriate and maybe relatable for that audience. And it's a really, really nice essay. There's a ton of other great essays in here. It's called the Magiculum 2. It's available on my Lulu Spotlight site. Self-published. So if you're interested in those essays, they're really fun. But yeah, Marcus has some great ideas.
Well, speaking of essays, we've referred to it already, and I'm so excited about it. I don't mind referring to it again. The producer of the show is a friend of mine, so he won't mind either. You've got it on your bookshelf facing the audience. It's that one. If you haven't got it, get it, because Todd, it's in here and he's talking about boundary objects and everything else. I'm not going to tell you what it is. Well, I can if you got time till lunchtime tomorrow. But basically, if you haven't got your copy, get them. If you looked at the clip that Dear Mark in Vegas did, there's a lovely review from Paul Abbey and an equally lovely review from John O'Riordan.
You mentioned the boundary objects, and I have to tell an interesting story. We appointed a professor here in our business school, and she talked about what she called cultural co-production, and I sort of had to ask her what that meant. And then within her discussion, she mentioned, well, I use boundary objects in games. And I said, well, what's a boundary object, right? And so we ended up doing a project together, and this was to help women survivors of post-conflict in post-conflict countries. And she said, I want you to use magic as a way of communicating with this group and to make them feel like they want to participate in the main principles and themes of this research project. And one of them was questioning, another was sort of why things happen or what if questions, all this sort of possibilities, right? So I recorded a series of magic videos. And then we actually did 2 performances at this theater in Stoke-on-Trent here. One was with sort of peace groups working in the former Yugoslavia, and the other was with folks that had been in Afghanistan. And that was hard because we needed to translate. But it was really interesting doing magic for an audience that didn't speak English. And we made it through, which was fantastic. But in both examples, she would put a table of things out in front of people. So it was almost like a little leather suitcase full of objects she would dump onto the table, and people would come and sit at the table. And she said, what I want you to do in sort of groups of 2 is pick an object that means something to you, and then explain to the person sitting next to you why you have chosen that object and what it means to you, right? And I thought, this is never going to work, right? It was an unbelievable amount of noise because people were so into it. And I remember this one woman had picked up a small silver spoon. It was one of these tiny teaspoons you see almost like in a doll's house teacup. And she talked for 10 minutes about the importance of that silver spoon, right? And the memories it brought back from her childhood and all this other stuff. Someone else picked up a small darning spool, one of those wooden things you use to darn socks, right? And well, my mother used to do this. And I remember her sitting by the fireplace with her darning, and she would sit and fix all the socks for the family, right? And what was interesting about that is that my colleague said, look, there are certain objects in the world that are deeply meaningful within the context where they, were first established, but they are also meaningful across context. They transcend cultural difference, national difference, etc. And there's no sort of set list of boundary objects, but it's very interesting to see the meaning that an object might have to somebody, regardless of the context they find themselves in, and how that object, embeds itself within their emotions, their mind, and their memory. And so I have an effect I call the bequeathment. It has 5 objects. It has a book, a coin, a sort of a key, a little key, a finger ring, and a pocket watch. And I sort of talk through these different objects, and I don't give too much away about what the objects may or may not mean symbolically, but I ask someone just to put them in order, most important to least important. And that's it, right? And it's incredible how meaningful that can be for them. And then I say, look, the book is about, secrets, science, magic. It happens to be a small miniature Othello, which is about power and magic. And you put that closest to you, keys, hide away secrets. They put away our jewelry, et cetera, and work through each of the objects and potential meanings, and then do a mini reading for the person. And this got me really thinking about the importance of objects and the way people carry lucky charms with them, or something of meaning like a penny, or something from maybe an amusement park when they were a kid, and it always sits in their purse or always sits in their wallet, right? And yet you could give it to someone else and they say, oh, well, it's important to you for that reason, but let me tell you, right? And it really does provoke a really interesting discussion, exchanges between people. And so I've been playing with this idea of the boundary object, and I give an example in Magical Meditations of a new routine I'm working. I call the Mystic Traveler, and my boundary object is one of these little valise cases that people took on trains, and my second one is a passport. And I worked with those 2 things and developed a sort of 30-minute routine based on a quasi-fictional person. So I use the details in the passport to paint a picture of somebody that I've never met, but I can only discern some of the details about her life from what I've learned from the passport. And then I cobble together a bunch of other objects into this travel case. And so it's kind of cool because you can go to a performance, say an after dinner event with this little suitcase, plop it on the table, and you have a 30-minute act that you can do for a gathering of, say, 10 to 12 people. So that's the point of the essay in Magical Meditation. So buy one now.
Buy 2, give 1 to a friend for Christmas.
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
pretty much everybody here's got one or ordered it
Yeah,
anyway.
I
So,
imagine.
but for those of you watching the clip, yeah, as
But
Todd says, go get
but
one.
interestingly, the idea of the boundary object comes from the sociology of medicine, because people were interested in medical instruments and medical museums, that keep specimens, and it just developed out of that sort of field of inquiry. But it becomes really applicable to the world of magic, I think, because we use objects all the time. And I guess the other thing I didn't say is authentic objects. So my friend Professor BC writes about this, and he says, why would you have a kind of shiny painted box with dragons on the side? Why wouldn't you have a box that looks like something that would have been used in the thing that you're talking about, right? So it's that, how authentic can you be with the objects you're performing with? And that's another element that I'm exploring. And I spend a lot of time searching vintage antique shops and other things, and I root through drawers full of stuff. And sometimes I buy a bunch of stuff and I have no idea what I'm going to use it for. 5-10 years later, I go, that's what I'll do with it.
Yeah, you and I have chatted about this in the past, which is why I'm grinning. I'll wander around charity shops and secondhand shops or whatever, and antique fairs and places like that. And you and I have talked about this. We'll see something and go, okay, I got to have it. What are you going to do with it? No idea.
No idea.
Sit there for 5 years or more, and then suddenly, that would work for this.
I had a schoolboy diary from 1940 from a kid who was 10 years old. And
that's right. Yeah. Yes, you do.
I did it in the Dr. Stone dossiers, I think, but he had written something down on every day in pencil. And I thought, I'm not going to make that a card diary effect. There is something else I can do with that diary, right? And I'm just going to wait until I know what that something else is. And I came up with Roderick's diary. Now, speaking of weird documents, I was doing some research just locally in Nottingham, and I came across the archives at Nottinghamshire Council. And this may be difficult to see because of the shine on this, but this is a document from the 19th century, handwritten by the citizens of Nottingham. And when I found this document and started to read it, I couldn't believe it. It was at a public meeting of the inhabitants of Nottingham, held at the Exchange Hall on the first day of May, 1865. It was unanimously resolved that the meeting regards with horror, indignation, and abhorrence the appalling crime which has put the end to the life of President Lincoln. So this was about Abraham Lincoln. And I couldn't believe it that the citizens of Nottingham had got together and actually written a letter about their horror and abhorrence of the assassination of Abraham Lincoln. Now, this is great. This is a great premise for a magic trick. And so I spent a lot of time working on it. And of course, I have a copy of Abraham Lincoln's most famous speeches. So if you're going to, I like books. I always use books, boxes, portfolios, but never mind. Read a lot of Lincoln speeches, etc., and started to think about this. And so what I came up with is something I call the resolution. And I lead my audience down a garden path a little bit, unfortunately. But we start with a mental journey. I have the whole audience close their eyes and imagine that they are flying over the United Kingdom. And when they look down over the United Kingdom, they see a long tape measure across, from John O'Groats to Land's End. And instead of measures of distance, they see decades. And as they fly in their minds with their eyes closed, they go from 2025 to 2020 to 2015 to 2010 to 2000 to 1990. And I get them all the way back to the 19th century at some point. I said, we're now going to hover in the 19th century. And now in your minds, you're no longer floating over the United Kingdom, but you look over the Atlantic and find yourself on the East Coast of the United States. And they say, now we have a premise or we have a context for you to think about some information. And then lo and behold, the classic OM box with the Larry Becker solution of 3 different colored billets. And I ask a part of the audience to write down a month, a part of the audience to write down a day, and a part of the audience to write down a year. And of course, we collect everything up. On my table, I have a bag that has a Derringer pistol in it, which no one has seen. And this all culminates and comes together because I had somebody holding the resolution throughout the routine. And I only let them read the first sentence. And then I say, could you carry on reading, please? And so they read and they get to Lincoln's name. So people are starting to get a clue about who this might be about. And then I read a passage from Lincoln's last speech from April 11th, 1865. And I just read a small passage. I have it marked with one of these cool little book darts. And it's about, how he's going to try to bring America back together after the Civil War, right? And it's absolutely brilliant. People, you could see the sort of wheels are turning. And then I talk about that fateful night at Ford's Theater. I pulled the Derringer pistol out and I pointed at the participant's head. And then each person, they each have one of the billets chosen from the billet box, and they reveal the month, the day, and the year of the assassination of Abraham Lincoln, which was crowdsourced from the audience, right? That's a bad description, but that's effectively it. And there's no way you can perform it online because it requires a live audience. But I've had so much fun with that. It's quite dramatic and it builds nicely, but it has this sense of the lost voices of history, that there were people in Nottingham that cared about Abraham Lincoln that we'll never know who these people were, but they came together in the Exchange Hall. It's literally a 5-minute walk from where I live right now. And this lovely, document is in the archive sitting there, and available. And I think putting it in a little leatherette portfolio like this on stage is really, really attractive and quite professional. And for me, I call that the resolution. So again, maybe not so much about the ideas, but about a moment in history, and the importance that people remember those moments in history. And that a lot of time when we read history, we hear about all the famous people. We don't know about the other people. And in this case, it's the citizens of Nottingham who remain unknown, but they wrote a resolution in solidarity with the Americans, which, as an American living in Nottingham, it's a great thing to perform. So there you go.
Going to say, it makes a lot of sense and dovetails perfectly. And someone else could do it, but it won't make as much sense as an American living in Nottingham.
Yeah,
it's that simple.
Well, so some of these things are grounded, right? That I could take that somewhere else, but if people didn't know I was from Nottingham, I'd have to explain that.
Yes.
But to be in Nottingham performing that, I did it at a thing called the Curious Cabaret in Beeston, which is actually where Mark Oberon lives. And it's a lovely little bar that runs live magic once or twice a month. And it was really fun to be able to perform that. So, but the influence was this just totally randomly found this document in the Nottinghamshire archives, and I just couldn't believe my eyes. I was reading it and I thought, I've got to do something with that. So that's a found object.
I think if there's a message here is, yes, there are the latest releases and everything else on magic sites and shops, etc. But for me, the message here is look for unusual things.
Unusual things might find you, right? If you look too hard.
Yes.
Yeah. So
they find you. Yep.
Yeah. Just wandering around, sometimes something catches my eye.
Yep.
We have this place called Hopkinson's, which is like a 4-story vintage shop here just outside the train station in Nottingham. And they serve coffee and, alcohol and stuff in the ground floor. And they have all these stalls and things. And every time we go in, there's a new tranche of stuff. And, occasionally, I have an eye for stuff and you see a little display and you think, wow, what's that? You find something unusual. You find something, quite tatted. They go, we're really sorry. It's not in great condition. I'm like, no, it's perfect. Anything that's slightly beat up, I'll have, So, yeah, and I think these things sometimes, if you look too hard, you won't find them. But usually if you're just sort of casually walking around and you go, aha, look at that. that's going to be great. And then I have people give me stuff, and they say, oh, it's Christmas. Here's, like my daughter, she said, oh, I found this really weird, like leather case. I'm sure you'll be able to do something with it someday. And I love that, I just love that idea of a found object. And then maybe someday we'll do something with it. Right. And the method point, you asked me, some of my favorite magic books, not just the Gibson, but I love Chuck Hickok's Mentalism Incorporated, because he tells you how to structure a corporate show in a discrete time period. He tells you how to build implausibility over a performance. You start with what looks like a reasonable ability to do mathematical operations, and by the end, you're like doing direct mind reading and predictions, right? But you brought your audience on that journey throughout the performance. Now, he uses things like lifesaver mints and, stuff I don't use in my performance, but his philosophy of how you bring people through that ever so increasing implausibility and to have a real structure and tell a story. So when I design my shows now, I usually design them to be one word: enchantment, right? Or subversion, or something like that. And then say, okay, if I were to do a show on subversion, what would be the constituent elements? What would I want my audience to know, feel, and be at the end of the show? And then start to piece that together, right? So in that sense, I think there's a lot of thinking required. But the methods are there for us. It's Hickok's great. Bob Cassidy's work's unbelievable, right? Paramiracles, Ted Leslie, incredible book. Amazing insights in there. Max Maven's Prism, I think, is fantastic, right? There's just incredible stuff in there. Of course, 13 Steps is great. But never look past Royal Road to card magic. And I'll explain why in a moment. What is there, right, is there for the taking. But if you use those principles slightly differently, and I'm never sort of method first. I'm always in effect and impact and story. And then I think, okay, how am I going to get there? It's methods last in that sense. And then, of course, there are many ways to skin a cat, as we say in America. There are many methodological solutions to getting to where you want to do. And it's probably the case that they're clunkier when you're designing something, and then they refine over time. Or you find a super easy change or modification that makes it more elegant and easier to perform.
Yep, absolutely. I think this would be a good time for folk to jump in and say whatever they want to say, or just converse with, ask a question, or just converse with Todd.
Hi, Todd. I find this fascinating this evening, and without insulting anyone at all, what I love is a mobile phone effect hasn't been mentioned tonight, or a Rubik's Cube effect hasn't been mentioned, because what you're bringing into magic is a sense of maturity.
Thank you.
I don't know if everyone would go along with that today, but I think it's so important that magic could be educational, not trying to fool people, trying to bring people on a journey. And you've certainly brought me on a journey tonight. And I've been performing magic for many, many years. But to actually start off with something that is an item of interest, something happens around it, you're on the journey with it, rather than tricks.
Yeah.
I don't like the words that magic tricks, downloads, this and that. I people would laugh in my club. I go around charity shops all the time, and I pick up objects, and I see something that could be from a book I've read many years ago, and I can adopt it. But your philosophy on magic is really expanding the imagination of people. Why do they want to watch this? They want to be taken to a place that's a sense of wonder. I know that's a bit of a climax, but not to be fooled, not to be confused, but just storylines. I've got so many things here written down. Forgive me.
It's okay.
because I am passionate about this. You mentioned about personal items that can affect people. Many experiences I've had with elderly people, although I would include myself in that line, um, with I perform at half a crown's a great deal. And a half a crown, if you're performing an effect with six half a crowns or a half a crown, for many people that brings so much conversation into the evening. You don't really have to try that hard to perform. It becomes a conversation.
Mhm.
And I think if magic becomes a conversation with you and the person that you're with, I think that's really what we should all strive for, not the mere fact that I done a wonderful trick and they were baffled. Because I don't go for that. I go for that they just felt an experience. They found out something about me. They found out something about themselves, which I think your philosophy on performing will bring out a great deal in people. And I think it will touch them. It will touch them rather than the trick that fooled them. And thank you for this evening. I do appreciate it. Thank you, Todd. Thank you.
Thank you, John. That was very, very kind of you to say. And one of the things you just said triggered another uh, insight in my mind, and that is the debate as to if you're a mentalist and you're doing, let's say, a pseudo psychometry routine with bags or whatever it is, envelopes, it doesn't matter. Do you go with bring your own objects that let people choose and put in, or do you go with whatever objects the audience have? And I know there's a massive debate about this. It's just that nowadays nobody has coins and cash in their pocket, right? They all have credit cards and mobile phones. A lot of people might put silly things in, and therefore you have nothing really to kind of grip and perform with. So I made the case that, in my bequeathment effect, I put the 5 objects out there for you. And the storyline is these are heirlooms, family heirlooms, been passed down to me. And there's a letter that explains the power of these objects. But what's the power that they might have for you, right? And I think that it protects you because you might get something naff from the audience. And therefore you're like, oh, okay, great. You gave me a plastic ring from a gumball machine, not very interesting, right? And so sometimes there's great risk in doing that. Whereas if you have these, as you said, the half crown coin is always interesting, right? A miniature printed Othello from Shakespeare. They think, how do you get Shakespeare into a book that big, And then 2 of the things I have is one is a Victorian gold ring with a ruby on it, which is like ridiculously expensive, and a gold pocket watch from the 1930s that commemorated my great grandfather's service to an architectural industry in Dutch, because they all lived in the Netherlands, right? And I carry these things around with great care, of course, but to have that there, proper gold, 1930s proper pocket watch, a proper Victorian gold ring, a half crown coin or a Morgan silver dollar, even, something that feels like it has value and gravitas, right? And then the mystery of a key, is fantastic, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So anyway, you trigger this thought because there was something online the other day and somebody was saying, do you bring your own objects or let people, supply their own objects? I think bringing your own in this instance can give you can reduce risk and can actually allow you to bring meaning and emotional connection to people if you choose your objects carefully.
I would say, Todd, I know other people may want to come in and say, but if you bring your own objects, you're prepared with a story behind those objects, what it means to you, and they may be able to relate to that as well. And that sets a rapport up as well. It may be a key, it may be the coin, it may be a small little purse.
Mm-hmm.
Those kind of things. And you're right. Most people may not want to take things out their pockets. They may want, but if they see interest in objects, this is where I think the charity shops come into it again. You
Absolutely.
pick something really unusual, something that looks worn, something from one of the First or Second World Wars or part of history. that will actually, I think that's the most powerful thing we can do in magic rather, and I think you mentioned earlier on, what does a little dragon box mean to anyone? It means a trick.
Yeah.
It
You know,
just
look, there's a time and a place for all that, you know, and I don't want to disparage
no,
anyone.
I,
It just isn't me.
I'm only talking personally. If I take a little dragon box out or something like that, people can say, "Well, he's going to do a trick now." I don't want that. I want an experience where if I take a coin out and the coin vanishes, that to me is a kind of an emotional kind of thing rather
Yeah.
than something. Yeah, but
Yeah.
yeah.
Anthony, I've got one more thing to share with everyone. But before I do so, is there any other question from anybody? Stephen, go ahead.
Yeah, Steve, go ahead.
Hi, Todd.
Hey,
Thanks. This has been a great presentation this evening.
thank you.
Very enjoyable. Uh, I find some of what you're talking about to be very interesting um, in a number of ways. I'm a big fan of Mike Vincent's, and I
Me
like the
too.
way he does his presentation. And I've spoken to him a bit, and one of the key things that he mentions is, or asks, that you have to answer is why should the audience care?
Mhm.
That is a key thing. You walk out there, you do something great, wonderful. Why should they care versus just look, after you're done, just say, okay, whatever that was, and then turn and get back to what they were doing before. And I found you doing things in an academic fashion or an academic background behind the effect
Mhm.
to be very interesting because I grew up watching Ricky Jay in what I sort of consider to be his Robin Williams years.
Yeah.
He was just kind of whacked out, the long hair, throwing cards into watermelons and all kinds of things. And then he had a significant turn when he went to like 52 Assistants.
Mhm.
He actually peppers his whole presentation with information about the history of magic,
Yeah.
about Hofzinser, and it actually has a much more regal feel to it than just chucking cards at watermelons. And so what you're bringing in is something like that. It has a more of an air of sophistication, of maybe coming from a more erudite performer.
Right.
I know in Mike Vincent's, he has some effects that are based on the story is based on Greek mythology.
Mhm.
And personally, I find that very interesting. I've thought about that a lot with developing my own scripts. And not just, I think mythology presents great opportunities. You were talking about philosophy, that's there. Anything from history that might be a bit interesting. There are all kinds of things. But I suppose the question that I have for you is when you're working out your script and your overall presentation, how deep do you go into that? I mean, Ricky Jay in 52 Assistants peppers it across his performance.
Yeah.
Mike Vincent presents it in the effects that I've seen anyway as just a backdrop. He has one, I think it's called Pandora's Paradox. And then he has one that's based on Cassandra. And it just provides a story to keep the effect moving. But it never gets too deep into Greek mythology or, Ricky Jay never sat down and started quoting from magical texts, things like that. What do you find to be the right level of inclusion of that kind of material into your scripting?
It's a superb question. So you know the trick free will, Corbusier's free will. It's just a little chip and some other bits in a bag and a prediction, right? It's lovely. And I thought, well, why don't we do free will with 3 books written by people that actually had something to say about free will? So there are those who think we have free will. There are those who think we don't have any free will. And there's some that are kind of in the middle, right? And this presented a really cool opportunity because Oxford University Press produced these things called very short introductions. The great thing about those books is they're all the same size in terms of their, binding, roughly the same thickness, right? And they're all paperbacks, so they travel well. And so I made my own free will. I call it real free will. And there's a video on my YouTube channel doing it with the students. But you're able to talk about, well, this philosopher said, we have total free will. Everything we do is freedom of choice. And this one said, we have nothing, and Karl Marx said it might be somewhere in between, men do not make history, all that kind of stuff. Right. And I actually have little, large quotes taped inside the book. So I flip to those and I'm able to read, confidently recite a pretty good chunky thing. And then I say almost flippantly, okay, so, Marx says this, Locke says that, Spinoza says this, and I make it slightly comical and less, heavy, depending on who the audience is. So with the students, I said, have you ever heard about any of these? And they're all going, about us. Oh, well, you need to be at university a bit longer, et cetera, et cetera. But they get the idea. One book is for free will. One book's not for free will. The other one's in the middle, right? And then the prediction is funny because we discard Karl Marx, which, for some people, they think that's funny, right? And I think it's funny because I say, oh, well, you discarded Karl Marx. I said, yeah, a lot of people do that these days, so it leaves you all sorts of great opportunities depending on the political affiliation of your audience. And even if there are like rabid Marxists, you can still make fun of them, right? So, and you get away with it, I think, in that sense. So that's a trick where I need to deeply explain what each of the authors are trying to argue and why it's important. I open a show about how do we know what we know, right? Which is like a epistemological question, right? And I say, is it through observation? Is it through faith alone? Or is it through some combination of these two things, right? How do you know that you've seen something and believe that it to be true? And I actually think in this whole kind of post-truth world we live in, that's a good set of questions, right? And then do a bunch of magic and everyone's super confused.
Yeah.
So, sometimes it depends on the audience, Stephen. Other times it depends on whether I'm doing a show that is going to be quite deeply philosophical. I did one that didn't work. I took John Rawls's idea of the veil of ignorance and illustrated it with tax policy, and it didn't work. Let's just say it didn't grip them, right? So, the veil of ignorance is if you were behind this veil of ignorance, you didn't know your race, you didn't know your gender, you didn't know your age, disability, whatever, income, what rules would you decide on to govern society, right? So it's that kind of, what if you could remove yourself from your own positionality and sit behind this veil of ignorance? How would you design a just society, right? Great premise for a trick, right? But it just fell flat. And I had this sort of, should we have a progressive tax, or some other kind of tax? And they did a choice thing and everything got predicted. And I thought, no, that didn't work. So it's okay because you learn from that. You learn from
right.
What works and what doesn't work. Unless you try it, you'll never know. And other things that I think won't work, absolutely smash. They land. People just love it. I've had people come up after and they said, that cogito, I heard that all the time. I had no idea what that meant. Now I know what it means and I'll never forget it. I'm like, great.
Yeah.
When I did Platonic, mathematical world, and I went into a low shoe square in China on the back of a turtle, and then I did a magic square. The video is great because I actually do Banachek's 37 force on the audience, and I've got a magic square made up to 37 on a tablet. And I look into the audience and I show them the low shoe square. I show the magic square. And then I say, right, when I do the selection of a number, and I said, what number are you thinking of? The woman says 37. And I'm, that's fascinating. And I open my pad and there's the magic square all made up. And I can show that everything adds to 37. In the break, people were in the bar and my assistant was in the bar and they said, well, I think that, when he had that magic square up, that was subliminal suggestion. Great. Yes.
Yeah.
You know,
I challenge you to go out and try that yourself.
yeah, and it's funny. I mean, I use Chuck Hickok's Magic Square because it's the only one I can remember. And combined with Banachek's Number Force, it gives you an incredibly powerful tool that looks like you're just this mathematical genius. And ironically, some science program contacted me last year, and they said, "Oh, we're doing a special on why the number 37 is so popular and turns up in so many things in the world. Can we have a copy of your performance of the 37 trick?" And I was just like, yeah, sure. Yes. So anyway, again, on the YouTube channel, it's a pretty bad recording because it was done years ago in Colchester's Headgate Theater. But I couldn't believe it when I hit 37, because I thought, I've got this square made up. I don't want to use the multiple loud. I just want to go with that one. And this woman in the clearest voice shouts out 37. And then I have to pretend like I'm not like super pleased. That's very interesting. You've chosen 37. I mean, the deceptive part of what we do is funny, isn't it? When you, I've got this wonderful mental asylum book test, and I've had medics come up to me and say, "Can I look through the mental asylum patient list?" I said, "Of course you can." And they look at it and they read through all the entries. I had another person come up to me and say, "I want to feel the power of that book." I said, "Of course you should. Here's the book." And I know there are a lot of magicians out there. They say, "Don't do that. You have to say it's a trick." I'm like, "No, you don't. You're still performing." You don't need a disclaimer. This is a patient registry from the Colney Hatch Mental Asylum in London from 1930. It is what I say it is, right? And if they want to come up and look through it, or they want to hold and feel the power, let them.
Well, exactly. I totally agree with that. I mean, some people may well shoot you and I down in flames. Fair enough. That's their opinion. But we're not revealing anything. We're not actually saying we have superpowers and, we're not being, I would say, grifters or con men or trying to steal money from people. It is, to my way of thinking, and as you've just said, Todd, part of the performance. If you have, as you say, a group of psychiatrists or analysts or whatever say, "Yes, well, can we have a look at the book?" "Yeah, sure, have a look. There's the book." I think that adds to it rather than
then takes away from it.
Yeah, that takes away from it. Yes, John, go ahead.
So the only principle is that you do no harm, of course. And
absolutely.
I don't think there's harm.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't think any one of us here,
John,
or for that matter, as you well know, and you very kindly, together with Scott Grossberg, wrote all the ethics, which is on our website. For absolutely, yeah, absolutely. I think any false claims, that's wrong. I mean, it's just plain and simple. It's wrong. Anyway, let me cut to John.
Hello again. Stephen was asking about how deep you go with the story or the philosophy. I just want to tell you a personal thing that happened to me many years ago. And I think sometimes we just have to be a little bit careful. We were on holiday with our young daughters in Cornwall, and I had the Magic Circle badge on the front of my car. And I very seldom perform. If I'm on holiday, I very seldom perform unless I'm asked to do it, I don't want to go in there and just say, "I'm here, I want to do a bit of magic tonight." So the owners of the hotel asked me, they said, "We noticed your badge, would you like to do something?" So we were in a bar one night, and I did what I love is the classics in magic. And the next morning, Tess, my wife, and my two daughters were going for breakfast, and a lady shoved a letter into my hand, and she said, "I'd like you to read it." So we were sitting down for breakfast, and I opened it up, and she accused me of being in league with the devil, and that I should go back to the my room and read the Gideon's Bible, certain chapters. And it was quite upsetting, because we had our breakfast, and I came out and I met this lady in the foyer with her husband. And she said, "Did you read the letter?" I said, "I did." And I said, "It was quite upsetting." I said, "What was the problem?" And this is her words, she said, "You put coins through an oak table, and I could hear the wood screaming. You actually passed salt from one hand to another,
Hmm.
And there's certain connotations to salt and things like this and blessings. So things sometimes we have to be a little bit careful if it's too convincing to some people, and if it can upset people, some people, they might take it literally.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to point it out because it is amazing, even in the 21st century, things can look so good, so convincing, and certainly with scams around the world and things. And I worry about this AI coming on board with mobile phones where they can
Yeah.
read your PIN numbers and all
Mhm.
this kind of thing. And I just think that, yes, make it entertaining, make it educational, touch them with emotion, but just be very careful that they don't think you're from another planet or something, you know.
Yeah, well, I once did a show for the High Sheriff of Essex, and I think when he wrote back to me, he said, "Well, if you lived in the time when this house was built, you would have been burned at the stake." But
Well,
we
yes,
really,
I, li I
we
live
really enjoyed your show.
I live in Essex, which is known as the Witches County.
Absolutely,
And
yeah,
as I say, the discovery of witchcraft, you know, when you think about people for whatever reasons were accused of witchcraft or mind thing, even though we're the 21st century, there are still people that we can be so convincing. And I just think we have to explain that we are, you know, we experience people at performance. We study the art of magic, the craft of magic, nothing sinister in it at all. And you know, I just wanted to put that out there. That's all.
I
You know?
think it's great. It needs to be said. This other thing as well, really linking what you just said to Stephen's question around depth. There's certain topics that I do in my effects that aren't for everyone. So I have one at the moment because I became fascinated with the book of Ecclesiastes. And it's not clear necessarily who wrote it, although there are theories who wrote it. And it's not clear whether it's a Christian text or not. And you know, you're already on sort of shaky ground when you're using content from the Bible, but it asks really interesting questions about time, chance, and death, which to me just gave wonderful frames and hooks to be able to use in a performance setting. And actually, the effect itself has people reading particular verses, the most popular verses from the book of Ecclesiastes, because it talks about the seasons and we all return to dust, and I make allusions to Shakespeare because there's lots of it, you know, in the gravedigger scene and all this stuff, you know. And in the end, I stop a sand timer. I have, you know, dice that I can throw on this box, and I can have a skull that's smoking. And when I open the box, all the passages we just read are now gone, and there's a death image, right? So it's really dark, right? And there's risk in performing that, right? Depending on who your audience is. And I think I try to find out as much as I can about who's booking me, because I would never do that to a general popular audience, right? But you're also right about the unintended consequences of being too good, right? So you know, you coins to the table, and she thinks you're in league with the devil. That's going to happen because there are folks that are going to be out there regardless of what you do. But you're quite right around the caution, and I've tried to push the envelope in certain areas. I think sticking to some of the more mainstream philosophical ideas and questions around truth, around time, around history, around science, you know, kind of thing, are safer. I think when I start going into the faith areas, it's probably too risky, right?
Depends also. It depends also. You're absolutely right, Mr. John, but it depends also on your performing character. I mean, there are things that you do that I can do, and there are things I do that you can do. But I think it would be stupid, I mean, really downright stupid, to do it because our
Yeah.
performing characters are totally different. In a treatise on performance and presentation, and part of it's included in, I keep plugging the book, why not? It's an book. Part of it's in my piece in there about John Wayne in tights. Now, John Wayne drew people to the box office, and he did it well. He wasn't exactly what you might call, Al Pacino or Sir Laurence Olivier or Lord Olivier, but he was John Wayne, and he did what John Wayne did best.
Yeah.
And my analogy in the little piece that I put in there is, if you put him in a pair of tights reciting Shakespeare, it wouldn't work. It just wouldn't. So, it depends on the performing character. Just jog my memory. Some of you may remember it way back in the day. I think it was Max von Sydow who played the role of Christ in one of the sort of movies about Christ. And there's the centurion standing there, and he's got his back to the audience. Well, the theater audience. It's on film. It's a movie, right? So he's not like that. If the audience sitting there, they're watching a movie, and there's a centurion. And to me, that's really funny, because without seeing his face, although he's dressed as a Roman centurion, he's got his back to you, the way he delivers the line, that it's John Wayne, which is, truly this man was a son of God. It's just funny in the movie. It's just funny. It's not meant to be funny, but it is.
Yeah.
It's like Ecclesiasticus. I mean, I think you have to read texts and sacred texts, whether you agree with them or not. It's an entirely different conversation for another time. But Ecclesiasticus, I found it depressing. I mean, one of the
really
most depressing thing ever.
Yeah.
Because at that time, when I read it, I've never gone through it again. I kind of bought into the theory that, yes, it was Solomon who wrote it. As you rightly point out, there's now a lot of evidence to say, well, perhaps he didn't. But that's neither here nor there. But if you take bits from it, it's quite fascinating to use depending on the performing character.
Yeah.
And that's really all it is.
Yeah.
I love the linking rings and never done them. Ever. My son has done it, won awards, blah, blah, blah. But I've never done it, because it doesn't make any sense for any of my performing characters. It just doesn't.
Right.
It just doesn't. It falls. Oh, Paul, you got your hand up.
I had to jump in here.
Yeah, go ahead.
It is entertainment. That's all it is. It's just a bit of fun. And just to add to that, when I do my entertainment, I do it everything tongue in cheek, and I say to people, it's just a bit of fun.
Please reach out. I'm happy to have a chat. But I guess one of the other things, just to kind of loop together John and some of the other comments, I was doing this thing about Descartes and the copper ball and a black ball in various hands, and the one thing that's great is the copper ball is probably 10 times heavier than the black one. So I start by saying, I'm going to drop both of these into your hands. And I said, what did you notice? And they said, oh, the copper one's really heavy. And I said, what do you mean by that? Oh, it was a lot heavier than I expected, right? And it plays into this idea about perception and, our senses deceiving us. So it's a nice link back to the Descartes cogito discussion. And then when I show the black ball, I said, well, Descartes actually thought that the black ball was black because it absorbed all the tears of the dead souls of the world. And then I look at the audience and I think, okay, they're either going to hate that or going to like it. But in any case, I will say, that's a bit deep, isn't it? Anyway, right? So you release, in a way, your audience, you give them permission to be offended or not, but you also demonstrate that you weren't going to just stop on all the tears of the dead souls of the world, right? You're not going to let that land and just sit there. It's a pregnant pause, and then you can say, right, that's a bit heavy, isn't it? So sometimes I make fun of myself while I'm performing to maybe ease the pressure or take away from some of the depth. So the ponderous, very serious, mentalist isn't really my scene either. And I was more intrigued with sort of the Dead Poets Society, the Robin Williams teacher character, not as crazy as that, but the idea that you were performing and demonstrating to get the kids to love poetry again, right? I think that's nice. I like the Tom Hanks characters in the Dan Brown films because he's this traveling, polymath that knows things about symbols and history and connections and all that kind of stuff, but at the same time is quite approachable, right? And I want people to feel that they're in a comfortable, approachable environment where they're going to learn loads of stuff. And if I say something like tears of the lost souls of earth, I'll give them comfort by saying, that's a bit heavy, isn't it? And then move on and perform the effect. So I guess I've learned that over the years. I kind of try to read the audience to see if they're like, that they've just really got shocked by something I say. Never swear when I perform. And I try to keep it super polite. But a lot of what I do is still highly improvisational because I have no idea what's going to happen. So I have mental pegs about where I'm going to go in a routine, but it all depends on what the audience is doing. And some of my routines, I get the information I require at different moments in real time. So I don't even know what the outcome of the trick's going to be until I get to the end. Oh, yeah. And the other bit of feedback I had from somebody, it was the most positive feedback expressed in the most negative way. This guy came up to me after a corporate event up in Blackburn, and he said, I just hate watching you perform. And I said, thanks very much. I said, why, what do you mean? And he said, you're very well spoken and you carry yourself really well. And he goes, but I hate watching you because I'm so worried that something isn't going to work. So it's a backhanded way of saying, you're taking a great risk in trying to do this material, particularly if there's a probability of failure, right? And he was feeling for me, right? He said, you shouldn't be doing magic because it might go wrong and then it would make you look bad. So that was an interesting piece of feedback.
Well, no doubt he meant well.
Yeah. But his first line was, I hate watching you perform.
Right. Yeah, but I think people like you and I mean, although our characters are different, there are similarities in what we do.
Yeah.
What we called, I think, in our business as bold performers, but that comes with tons of performing, tons of being with an audience, understanding a tremendous amount of psychology. I don't mean, we all have to carry around PhDs in psychology or clinical psychology, but having a fair grounding in it. And one of the people who's very good at it, almost naturally, is very, very dear pal of mine, and someone I consider to be the best mentalist ever, barring one or two, perhaps, and that's Mark Paul. I mean, he's a tall guy. He's very laid back. I mean, he's doing things that you kind of find unbelievable, but he injects this lovable personality into it. He really does. He does that. It doesn't matter if he's on TV or live. He injects this personality. He has an enthusiastic kind of energy without getting into your face. So it's very much like, the characters. What I'm sorry, did I just call John? Did you want to say something, John?
No,
sorry, I kind of missed you there. Yeah, John, please.
When Todd said about the person that was he hated watching you, I think that's a real compliment because you've built a bit of suspense in there, haven't you?
Yeah. It was very funny. Really funny, actually.
I mean, suspense is important in magic. It's almost when you turn over what apparently is the wrong card and you put it into their hand, and they feel for you, and then all of a sudden it's the right card. That kind of that you're becoming friends. So that's a wonderful part of performance as well. So I think that's a compliment, Todd.
Yeah. And I had someone come up to me. She said, I saw you perform a year ago and you had given me a little prediction based on some tarot cards. And I carry it in my purse to this day because it really spoke to me. And I was just like, great. keep it in the wallet. Keep going.
Yeah. So I just thought I'd bring you in as a Kale before we wrap up because you've been very quiet, which is fine. Is there something you want to add or take away?
I'm looking almost at myself because Todd is talking about using real items, real objects. And since I started in magic, he's one of the persons that I've almost instantly followed, him and Professor BC. So it's the same line and the kind of books and Wittgenstein, and my work what I base my work is on John Searle and Alan Moore from Northampton. So, and Not the only question, but the main question is, it's really specific, because how do you manage, or how do you balance the script with the effect in itself, not to overpower or underpower one of them?
Great question. So it's interesting people use the word script, because I actually don't write any of it down. Sometimes I write up effects in the ways that I contribute to books and publications and my own books and that kind of thing, but they're almost after the fact. I usually write a structure, and I think about how can I express the main idea from whoever I'm using, whether it's Plato, Jung, Freud, whoever, it doesn't matter. And I think, how am I going to wend that tale through the structure of where I need to get to? So I think there's an attenuation that takes place in terms of your question around balance. There's an attenuation that takes place as I practice, and rehearse. And I do a lot of rehearsals just on my own to myself, because I need to see how it feels in terms of that balance before I go out and try it on an audience. And then, because I'm very highly interactive and I move around quite a bit, and as Anthony knows, I tend to wear this giant academic gown, which has these billowy sleeves, and kind of, it's very Harry Potter-esque, right? In terms of, a Dumbledore type thing that moves around. So I always want to leave time to have those offbeat moments where the audience is trying to say something, communicate something, or interact with me. I'm not a performer to people, but a performer with people. And I think that's important as well. So I have the mental pegs in terms of the plot, and I have, the philosophies memorized, and I'm summarizing and paraphrasing. So it's a lot like teaching and lecturing, which I've done my whole life in my world as a political scientist. And my colleagues and I used to joke, we used to say we could write an essay on anything. And then we got to the point where we could say we could give a lecture on anything. and we're not bragging. It's just that because we do it over and over and over and over again, you become consciously or unconsciously competent in being able to give a lecture. If somebody, can you say 10 words or 10 minutes worth of material at the end of this session? Sure, fine. I once got invited to a thing at my university where they had this big launch of this giant new research group and all this other stuff. And they said, and now we'd like to bring up Professor Landman to explain why this is so important to the faculty. And one of the research leads sitting next to me, she said, did you know you were being called up? I said, no one briefed me. No one told me anything. And I went up and gave a 15-minute spiel and sat down again. And she looked at me and she goes, you realize you are actually completely mad. She said, how did you do that? I said, I have no idea. Right. So I think in terms of scripting, and maybe, I'm terrified of acting, Paul. I would like to do it, but then I don't want to memorize lines, right? I don't want to memorize lines. I want to be a more organic performer, right? So in terms of my performances, I might have a set list tucked away somewhere. I might have a few cues here and there hidden behind a suitcase or a box or a prop, but otherwise I haven't really written a script for my shows, and I kind of see how it's going to go once I'm out there, quote unquote, with the people. And then the other secret I have is I have a really good clock in my mind. So my partner will write a speech because she knows how many words per minute that she speaks. And they say, you've got 15 minutes. She does the math and she writes the precise number of words that will fill the time. And what I'll do is I want to share the top 4 ideas, and I say, how long do I got? And they say, you got 20 minutes. Great. And I start. And when I finish, it's 19 minutes and 59 seconds. And I haven't looked at a watch or a clock. I cannot explain how I do it. And if somebody said you only have 5 minutes, I'll be done at 4 minutes and 59 seconds, right? And I think that's helpful in magical performance because you have a booking, you have a slot on a major show. I did Eastbourne for IBM a couple of years ago. They said you got 15 minutes. And when I walked off stage, it was 14 minutes and 59 seconds. Nailed it.
I absolutely insist that magicians should work with scripts because they don't know how to speak. They have patter, but the number of magicians go and they got the egos bursting out of there, but it is entertaining. This is the difference. But a professional speaker can do what you do. I can do what I do because I'm an actor, and with an actor, you learn script, but you also learn how to ad lib afterwards, or you learn how to paraphrase afterwards. And sometimes you have to do that in front of the director and the producer because they say, put your own inflection into that. What would you add into that? And you've got to be able to do that. Magicians can't. What I'd like to do, Todd, if I may, I was just looking you up on here and sending you an email. I'd like to talk further about this because I don't want to do what you do, but what you've done is you influenced me into doing something completely different, but using your thought process, which is really interesting. And I think the reason why it's worked for me is because I come from it from an academic point of view as a teacher, performance teacher, if you see what I mean, as opposed to a magician. I'm a fraud, really. I don't consider myself a magician at all. I've kind of snuck in the back door here, and I'm going, if I kind of give it up.
Paul and I have had friendly arguments about this where he said, well, I'm a bit of a fraud. And I said, no, you're not. You're doing what you do well when you do things. I mean, I've had him in other shows I've produced. I said, when you're doing it, there's nothing fraudulent about what you do. You're just doing it. And that's fine. And I think, this is a good point to close. This has been fascinating. Thanks to so much to Todd and indeed the wonderful participation of all you gentlemen. This is probably a topic, or there are topics within here that we can expand on further, because we can't kind of like cover it all the time, everything. So there are the topics like you raised. I mean, there's a clip on the AMI Certified Members Secret Group, if you scroll down, which John is in it, Mike Vincent, talking about scripting. And I think we all have different definitions. They're not necessarily right. They're not necessarily wrong. They're just definitions of magicians scripting. I think we're probably one of the few performing arts that we don't have to stick rigidly to, hell is empty and all the devils are here, because that's what Shakespeare wrote. You can't change it. You have to say it if you're in The Tempest or Prospero or whoever. But as a magician, as Todd has rightly pointed out, somebody will say something to you, and there's nothing wrong in going 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 in your head and then responding. Sometimes, and this is personal, if I don't have some repartee of some kind, not necessarily clever, of some kind, I will just stop and go, and just smile at the person, just make them feel like they're the only person in that audience. 2 people taught me that directly and indirectly. One was dear Eugene, blessings for his memory, the lighthouse effect, which is you were sweeping the entire room, something like a lighthouse does. So everybody kind of feels involved.
Yes, magician Steve Cohen has a lovely book called Win the Crowd, came out years ago. And he talks about that eye contact thing that, not only do you scan your audience, but you make eye contact with particular people. One of my other inexplicable skills is I have a good memory for people's names and actually remembering, because magicians sometimes say, oh, what's your name? And someone says, oh, my name's Stan. And then they bring them up to the row 3, whatever trick they're doing. And what was your name again? No. They gave it to you already. Don't forget that person's name. Value that person, right? And that Win the Crowd book you got there, Paul, is brilliant. And he has really great experiments about pushing boundaries. Like he has a great experiment when he says, spend a day trying to put coins in people's pockets. Get a stack of pennies or a stack of nickels or whatever. And during the day, how many people in the office can you drop a nickel into their shirt pocket or into their purse or into their desk space, whatever? Go outside your comfort zone and try it, right? And that builds a skill set, that he thinks is important. So great book, Win the Crowd. I can highly recommend reading that.
There is a gentleman that we all know, and for that reason, I am not going to mention his name. Nothing bad, actually something good. He's absolutely brilliant at what I would term, or what we would call in the industry, comedy magic. His magic is incredibly skillful, but he weaves it with comedy, and he has this amazing skill of dropping cards into people's pockets. not necessarily always jackets. It's just incredible. I actually sat almost backstage once, kind of backstage, and watched him do this. And it's a skill. I mean, that's all I can say. Anyway, gentlemen, thank you very kindly. If there's not any last sort of minute comments, all I would say is a very deep thanks to dear Todd. Much, much, much appreciation. I think we've enjoyed this session, would be an understatement. I think everybody would agree with that.
I do. And thank you, Todd. And thank you, Anthony,
you.
for making this possible.
Thank you all. It was great. I really enjoyed it.
Take it
All
easy,
right.
everybody. Thank
Thank
you
you.
so much. Thank you.
So
Take care
long.
now.